Well, what's up, guys? Hey, as we continue our series, we are going to be in Genesis chapter 27. So if you have a Bible, I invite you to go there, and we're going to be recapping a lot of it and diving into certain portions of it tonight together to keep us from reading a lot of Scripture, and we're just going to dive into certain portions of it. But to kind of open up and to set up where we're going, whenever I was a kid, I was a pyro. Like, there's no way around it. Like, I really enjoyed just lighting things on fire. Anybody else, like, you had a moment with, all by myself? Okay, there's a few of us. So, like, I just like to see things burn. And I'm sure that there's probably counseling needed somewhere in there. But one of the things that I did was me and my friends, whenever I was in elementary school, we decided that we wanted to see what it looked like for us to make our own torch out of socks that were tied together. What would these socks look like as they burn on fire? Well, we go behind my house to the back alleyway, and we take it, and all these socks are tied together on this stick, and I put it in the ground, and I light it on fire, and we're sitting there, and we're like, this is pretty cool. Hey, this is fun. It's at that moment that I figured out what happens whenever you light something on fire, specifically socks. When you light socks on fire, here's what happens. They start to drip. Okay, so they don't stay. Little by little, it started to drip. And it's at that moment that they started to drip that I looked around this homemade torch, and I realized that we had planted this thing in a patch of dead grass. Okay, and so immediately, me and my friends, we look at each other like the socks drip, and there was nothing to do. Like, all we could do is watch it spread. And we look at each other, I look at them, I look at the fire, I look at them, we all just kind of go, ah! And like, we run as fast as we can. Like, I run away, and I don't know what to do. So what I do is I go inside, and I decide that I'm going to disguise myself. And so I changed clothes because I was like, what if someone saw me? And so I changed clothes. I changed the way my hair was done. Again, this is me in elementary school. And my granny, she lived right across the street from me growing up. So I knew that granny was somehow going to get involved. And so I like ran away from my house. I made a circle. I made a lap around my neighborhood. And I came back, and I was riding my bike. And I tried to disguise myself in order to deceive everyone so they thought that I had nothing to do with this. And then so at that time, that as I'm getting closer, I see all of the fire trucks have pulled up. So this thing spread, okay? All the fire trucks pull out, and I see Granny walking across the street, making eye contact with me. You know, it's at that moment that I was just hoping that I could deceive them enough to get away with it. Now, here's why I share that, because tonight, that brings up the topic that we're going into. It's kind of like I tried to deceive them. I tried to make myself look enough different that they wouldn't know. Tonight we're talking about the topic of deception. And at first here, maybe you think, okay, well, deception, that's not really me. Well, actually, there's a study that was done, and there's a little snapshot of it. This is from a group of people that they counsel people for a living through this website. And here's what they posted. On average, people lie 11 times per week. 60% of adults lie during conversation, lying 3 times every 10 minutes. That's a lot of deception. To define it, deception is this, because a lot of us, we know what it is, but what does it actually mean? The first definition, it was classic. The first definition of deception that popped up is the act of deceiving. So I thought that wouldn't be very helpful. I found another one. The act of causing someone to accept as true what is actually false. Or another way to say, living a lie. Living a duplicitous life. And we're going to dive into this tonight as we look at Jacob, his name meaning deceiver or heel grabber. We're going to see how he changes, kind of like whenever I was running from that fire, and I changed what I was wearing. He's actually going to change clothes. He's going to change what he is wearing, and he's going to change what he smells like, and he's going to change what he feels like because his father is going blind or fully blind at this time and can't see. So he's trying to fool his father and deceive his father. And so this is what we're going to be diving into. We're going to see simply that deception leads to destruction. It leads to living a life on the run. And then we're going to get to the good news of how God meets our deception with this invitation. So let's begin by kind of tracking through the passage. I'll begin by recapping what's going on in Genesis 27. So like I said, their father is blind. So Isaac is blind, and Jacob and Rebekah, they deceive their father. So Esau comes in, and Isaac says, hey, I don't know when I'm going to die, but I know that it's soon. And he says, before I bless you, this blessing that we read about in Genesis 27, it's like this verbal passing on of the baton of leadership for the family and an inheritance for the family. It's kind of this verbal passing on. It's the celebration of the father, kind of celebrating the great future of the individual getting blessed. And so he says, I'm going to bless Esau. And he says, Esau, first, you got to go get some food for me. Because he really loved whenever Esau would go out, hunt, kill something, bring it back, and make it for him. And so he says, do that, and after that, I'm going to bless you. Well, while Esau is out in the field hunting, Rebekah, Isaac's wife, hears of this and decides that he's going to deceive, that they are going to deceive him, rather. And we pick this up in verse 15, how Rebekah and Jacob deceive. It says, then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And she put the delicious food and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. So he went into his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Which of my kids are you? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. So the deception has taken place. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? He answered, because the Lord your God granted me success. We're going to talk about that here in a few moments. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, who felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. Just got to stop and say, man, how hairy was this guy? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out in heaven. Maybe he kept it. I don't know. It says, so he blessed him. Verse 24, he said, are you really my son Esau? He answered, I am, doubling down on the lie. And then if you jump to verse 35, what happens is he gives this blessing, and then after Jacob leaves, Esau comes back in from the hunt, and him and his father both find out that they've been deceived. In verse 35, Isaac says to his son Esau, your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. And then verse 41 through 43. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Laban, my brother, in Haran. So there is like a lot of family dysfunction going around here as we read this. Happy Father's Day, I guess, to him. But there is all kinds of family dysfunction going on as we start to unpack this first point. Deception, it brings destruction. And we're going to see several ways that this happens. The first way is it's simply this, destruction to your relationship with others. So we see that the mom deceives her husband. We see that the brother deceives his father and his brother. We see this happening, like they put the fun in dysfunctional. How many of you guys, you grew up in a dysfunctional home? Some of us were like, yeah, that's me. All kinds of stuff. Like y'all are like, man, you should see it at Thanksgiving. It is, woo. I saw a lot of that growing up myself. I saw all kinds of deception in my family life. And ultimately, specifically with my own dad. But as I started to step into my own decisions and how I would live, I started to live a life of deception. And that took me places that I didn't really want to be internally and externally. But it began by me simply doing what a lot of us have probably done in the room. I deceived my mom and my stepdad by telling them that I would tell them I was going to church, actually. And because I wanted them to give me like the free pass. Oh, praise God, going to church. And what I would do is I would go get drunk and high with my friends. And that was the beginning of what started to catch up with me, and I started to be found out little by little, and it started to have this erosion of trust, right? That's what happens. When you break somebody's trust, it just erodes it little by little by little, and that's what happened in my life, and this is certainly what happens. Clearly what's happening with Jacob and his brother Esau. He has completely eroded the trust that Esau would have in him. And that's how deception works, isn't it? It erodes over time. A lot of times it takes a while. So, bless you. But it takes a while. And as I thought about that, I thought about this picture of the Rio Grande. So, obviously, a lot of people go, it's like an attraction that people travel from all over the United States to go see the Rio Grande. Well, how was the Rio Grande created? Over years and years, thousands of years. The estimation is over just so many years, little by little, that chasm was created and it was eroded deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, this is how deception works. It creates a chasm between people. And the longer that you stay in it, the deeper it goes. And ultimately, it puts you in this valley. And it's just happened over time, this erosion of trust. And I've just seen this play out, not only in my own life, but in several others' lives as I've gotten to talk with a lot of people. As we start to see this even happen in Jacob's life. It brings destruction to relationships, and it separates relationships slowly but surely. And it not only hurts your relationship with others, it actually hurts the one who's deceiving, right? Like here's a fact. Here is a fact, and you can write this down. You can't deceive others without being deceived yourself. Like that's an absolute fact. You cannot deceive others without being deceived yourself. So Rebekah and Jacob, how were they self-deceived? They thought, simply put, they thought it was worth it. And we see like what happens. Like she lies to her husband as he's about to die. Guys, the last conversation that Jacob has with his father is lying to him. Because she says, go and flee. And we're going to talk about that here more in a moment. Like, and if you jump down, look at verse 41, we read this together. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which the father had blessed him. So his brother hates him. This all because he thought that it would be worth it, because his mom thought that it would be worth it. And this passage, what it does is it begs this question. Was it worth it? And I think the obvious answer, like none of us are going to be like, yeah, definitely. But here's how self-deception works. Self-deception leads us over and over again to making the wrong decision. And it's really easy when we have the 1,000-mile high view of what's going on here, but whenever we're in the middle and we are the Jacob in the situation, we find ourselves making the wrong decision because we believe it's worth it in the moment. And we deceive ourselves. And man, again, I'm right there with anybody else in the room that says, yeah, I've been there and I've done that. And if you're here and you're like, man, I don't know that I struggle with self-deception. I don't know that that's me. Well, maybe more so than you might first think. For instance, how many of you have been watching Netflix and it pops up, the little judgy screen? You still watching this? And you turn and maybe you're by yourself, so you say self. we can do one more episode, right? And you think to yourself, self, yes, just one more. And then how many do you watch? Way too late, and now you're like, oh no, self. Like you made a bad decision, and it all started with this self-deception of just one more. We've all been there in a lighthearted way. Now, to get more real, here's what happens in our lives with God. There's people that they will go to church, and man, I'm so thankful for the fact, like I'm very aware that there's a lot of emotion that's expressed in this room. There's a lot of people that sense something down deep in their souls as they're worshiping and as they're like we're singing that bridge. There's no body in the grave now. Like Jesus has risen, and we're like, man, this is like, I needed this. This is good stuff. And the band is hitting on all cylinders. It's just like, man, this is amazing. And we feel this movement, and maybe you've even sat through a sermon where you're going like, man, I sense something drawing something to the depths of my soul, and I want to say yes to that. So we go, man, that felt so good. But here's what happens. People walk away, and while they felt a lot of emotion, nothing in their life changes. And the self-deception is in this, believing that you're good because you got your Jesus fix for the week. If nothing in your life is saying, God, I actually want to take more steps of saying, here's more of me. And it's always just, I like to feel something, but there's no true movement. Like it's been said this way, God doesn't want just your emotion, he wants your devotion. And this is what should be happening, but a lot of times we find ourselves feeling emotions and we think that we're good because of that. Now, in addition to this, many, like the self-deception in their lives, it comes from this deep sense of I need to mask something. And there's a lot of subtle ways that we wear masks. I think that it's really interesting in this passage that he masks himself to smell and to feel like his brother. And we see this in verse 15 and 16. Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck, because my guy's hairy. And so what happens is we mask ourselves. Jesus' biggest problem with a specific group of people is his problem with the Pharisees as you read the Gospels. And in Matthew 23, he really lays out all the things that he sees these religious leaders, these pastors of the day, ministers of the day, well-respected people of the day. In Matthew chapter 23, verse 13, and he says this over and over again in this passage. He says, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." And this word hypocrites, it's in and of itself, this term is, we see it here and we're like, yeah, that's a very negative thing. But back in this time, this term was just taken from acting. It was taken from the stage. And so back in the day of Jesus, what would happen is people would actually wear a mask and one person would act out many different parts. So that one person would play several different roles on the stage. And so the person would wear a mask and he would have that voice going, and then whenever he was responding to that person or going into a new role, he would take that mask off and put on a new one. And the real him is hidden behind the mask the entire time. Jesus is saying this term from acting that everyone would have known, that someone would put on several different acts depending on what part they're playing. He looks at these religious people and says, this is you. This is you. The real you is hidden behind a mask. And there's some subtle ways that I think we battle with this. So some of us, we go, we are extremely independent. Very much so self-made, like that is something that you hold on to, which isn't bad in and of itself, but it is if it's masking that we don't trust others or God. It's a mask that we wear. We have this mask of accomplishment. The Pharisees would have had this mask. But what does it do? It masks our inadequacy. We have this mask of pride, like we need to present ourselves that we have no issues, no problems. And you know, it's interesting, even the most prideful of the prideful, people that are narcissists, psychologists have found this truth that people that are narcissists are masking the deep-seated belief that they're unlovable. And a lot of times in our pride, we're masking that as well. We stand behind all these masks. We have the mask of anger. Anger is a mask for hurt. That's what it is. And you respond, the defense mechanism is anger. What's deep down is hurt, but we wear this mask. And then we have, of course, the mask of the person that sometimes we can present at church, masking the sin struggles that are actually going on. And what happens is we wear these masks long enough and we become okay with it. Have you ever been there? And you start to lose who you actually are. And if you want to know if you struggle with this, if you struggle with wearing a mask, let me ask this question for you to think through. Is church you the real you? Like, is the you that you are presenting at church the real you? And this can be a struggle for us as we think through this, because we were taught, honestly, that we should be different in church. And I think that God is calling us into something where our outside life and inside the church life would be integrated because they're the same person. But we battle. And so we have seen that this mask, it leads to what? It distances us. It distances us from others. It distances us from God. It deceives ourselves. And then we look in verse 20, how it starts to erode us spiritually. Look at verse 20. As he's in this moment of deception, it says, but Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? And his son answers, Jacob answers with this, because the Lord your God granted me success. Now he's using God as part of his lie, his elaborate lie that he's living, part of his deception. And I believe this is going to be on the screens. I think it's worth writing down. When you live in deception, God becomes something you use instead of the one that you worship. And this is what's happening here as we see his story, as we see all of this start to unfold. He is using God. He is using the Lord's name in vain. He is using God as a part of his trickery. And I think a lot of us at this point were like, yeah, I'd never do that. Like, I don't know what's going on with, you're right. Like, he has some issues, but not I. Well, again, maybe it's us more than we first want to acknowledge. If we're thinking like, oh yeah, I would never do that, just use God as a part of deception. Let me ask you this. Do y'all know anyone, and it's okay if it was you, like this has happened many times. Do y'all know anyone who has ended a relationship with this, I need to break up with you so I can get closer to God? Y'all know anybody? But that's not bad in and of itself. Like sometimes that's a very, very true. That's some relationships need to come to an end because they're not good for your soul. They're not good for both of you, and it's keeping you from seeking the Lord. That can be true, except what happens 2 weeks later when you got, like, if you've got, anybody gotten God carded in this room, by the way? And so what happens 2 weeks later is all of a sudden you're looking over and like 2 rows over, she's sitting next to a new guy. And it's at that point that like you've never seen this guy raise his hand once in church, and all of a sudden whatever this is, yeah, I like it. And you're going, you know what? I don't know that she wanted to get closer to God at all. I think she might have wanted to get closer to that guy. And we see this, and that's a funny example, of course, but we've seen this more than we think maybe at first glance. People use God pretty often, actually, and even pastors use God. So there's a really well-known pastor that if I said his name right now, many of you guys have seen his sermon clips, have watched him, have probably even watch him now. And not all that he's done is bad, but here's what I want to say. I watched the whole sermon. I watched many sermons, actually, from this individual. And he had this drawing. And he talked about how he prayed that God would give him Jordans. And so he drew Jordans because he's an artist. He drew Jordans on this sheet of paper and said, I prayed that God would bless me with these Jordans. He said, and it happened. And he goes, and man, I'm a drummer. He said, so I was in this band, and so I drew this drum set. I said, God, would you give me this drum set? And he says, and I got it. And the whole time he was talking about these drawings, and then he showed this picture that he had drawn a few years ago and said, and I've been praying that God would give us a stadium for our church. And he had this picture of this stadium, and he was like, and we got it, and we got the stadium. Here's my problem. Every drawing was about him. And if I could speak, because it's not, and we're going to go to us here in just 1 second, but what I would say is, hey, all those drawings that God is everything you draw, it just comes to fruition. When are you going to draw the clean water well so that way people that are dying of unclean water across the world can have it? When are you going to draw that? When are you going to draw something that's not blessing you? Now, here is my point. Many claim Jesus, but actually they're worshiping them. And this is not just other people and pastors that are famous. It's been me before. In this next one, man, it has been me several times, but a lot of people, they go to worship. And again, this is all going to answer the question, how do we use God instead of actually worshiping him? A lot of people, whenever they go to church, here's the question that they think: what will I get? Now, that's not a bad question. Like, I hope that you can walk out of tonight and go, man, God, I've got something that was really good for me. We want that. But a lot of people, that's the only question that they're answering is, what will I get? And here's the truth, that that's the only question that you are seeking to answer, then who are you actually worshiping? Because worship is something that you give. Like, worship is something that you see God for who he is, the character of the very essence of who he is as a person, and then you look at what he's already done in the gospel of Jesus, that he pursued us and he chased us down to the point of dying for us on the cross that we might have life and life abundantly and life everlasting, and that we could be with him. And we respond in that saying, God, you deserve it all. You deserve to be worshiped. And you give something. It's not just about getting something. But Jacob, he was only thinking in his life, would you agree that he was just thinking, what can I get? And whenever the only question that you are trying to answer in your life is, what can I get? You will end up living a life of deception somewhere. So deception, it brings destruction to your relationships, to yourself, and to your faith. And it leads us to living a life on the run. Look at verse 43. Rebekah hears of the plot to kill him and says, now therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise, flee to Laban, my brother in Haran. Now, for reference, where is Haran? It's 450 to 500 miles away. There are no cars back then, just livestock. And so that's the only way that he could travel. For reference, Lubbock to Dallas is 350 miles. So he had to travel a very long way. Days and days and days to get as far as he possibly could, running for his life. So for me, I've lived my life on the run. In periods of time. I remember, so I was licensed to ministry whenever I was a freshman in high school. God had radically changed my life. The entire church prayed over me because they believed that God had called me into ministry, and then quickly fell into sin after that. Well, a couple months later, after that moment, I was asked by the youth pastor if I could pray over the service as we went into worship that night. And I hadn't talked to God in weeks. And the girl I was dating and having sex with, she was in the room. And I'm up here just giving this fabricated, fake prayer to God. And it was in that moment that I made a decision that I was like, I'm not doing this. And I ran from God. That was the last time I was in church for a very long time. And I lived my life on the run, diving into what I thought would bring pleasure, but actually ended up bringing paranoia, because that's what happens. That's what he was doing. He was living his life in paranoia. It was always just hanging over his head. He was waiting for his brother to come and kill him. He knew that threat was real, and he was running. And I lived my life this way. I think it's really interesting that Proverbs chapter 28, verse 1, it says this: the wicked flee, though no one pursues. And this described me at one point. I lived in paranoia, nervous that I was going to get caught in one of my many lies. I was nervous that I was going to get someone pregnant or get an STD whenever I was living promiscuously. I was always just panicked that I was going to get stopped by the cops as I was high and drinking and driving. Like, name it, it was going on, and I was living this life of paranoia that a lot of people say is like the fun life, and it's like, man, it really isn't. There's fun nights, but it leads to this baggage, which we talked about even last week. But I lived my life that way, and I've experienced consequences as a result of my own deception, being separated from my parents, and the battle that we had because of that. Now, things have been restored since. And maybe you're here and you're going, that's not my story. You're like, yes, Travis, I get it. You were bad. You're like, not I. Well, maybe that's not your story. But have you ever been internally just running for your life? Have you been internally, even though you are in the church, that you are running and you are a million miles away in your heart? In your own way, have you been living, or have you lived before, a life of deception? See, if we ended here, you'd be like, man, I don't feel encouraged. Like, this is a heavier message, and I realize that. And we're going to see how God encounters Jacob throughout his life as we continue on. Like, the whole time, the next week's going to be spent on God encountering Jacob in the midst of all of this, in the midst of him being on the run. But for tonight, here's where I want to land the plane with this final point. God meets our deception with an invitation. And here is the invitation, that you and I are invited by God to come out of hiding. Like, both of us, you and I, we can come out of hiding. So my aunt was, and I shared this story about a year ago, but it's a great story, so I will share it again. My aunt was dating this guy, and he's now her husband, so things worked out. But he shared with me some of his past dating experiences, and he shared this story from this girl that he went on a blind date with. And so they go to dinner. I don't know where it was at. We'll call it Chili's, because it's a good place. And so he goes, and they're eating at Chili's, and after having their burger and things like that, the lighthearted get to know you stuff, she asks, she goes, okay, so like, is there anything that's just like a no-go for you? And he's like, what do you mean? And she goes, well, are there like any deal breakers? And he kind of like, well, I'm not quite sure. And then she looks at him. She takes her teeth out of her mouth, sets them on the counter for God and all the people in Chili's to see. And she says, is this a deal breaker? It's a true story. I don't think that if that's you, you probably shouldn't take your teeth out in the middle of the restaurant. But I really appreciate, by the way, when he shared that story, I was like, man, that story really bites. Am I right? Okay. Hey, there it is. You had to have it. Oh, it's Father's Day. Had to have it somewhere there. Even though Ethan did a very poor job earlier of giving some dad jokes. But she laid it all out on the table, literally. And here's the truth about God when it comes to us. Like God is going, listen, before you ever say anything, God's going, it's already all laid out before me. Like God sees through every mask. God sees through everything that I don't want you guys to see all the time. God sees through everything that you came in this room holding on to or having hanging over your head in your past. God sees through it all, and he's like, and I'm still here. And we see this moment in John chapter 4 where he calls this woman out of hiding. In John chapter 4, the woman at the well, I'm going to jump through this story for time's sake, but in verse 4 it said, he had to pass through Samaria, so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob, y'all see the connection? Had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. And in verse 7 it says, a woman from Samaria came to draw water. This woman who was known to live a sinful life, which we'll see how here in just a minute. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. And then he says, I'm going to lay it all out for you. Jesus said to her in verse 16, it says, go call your husband and come here. The woman answered him, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, you are right in saying, I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. And this is where she was like, oh no, you know. And the woman in verse 25, they have this conversation about living water and how Jesus can give living water, and she still doesn't get it. And she says in verse 25, the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. When he comes, he's going to tell us all things, like he's going to make everything right. In verse 26, Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. I'm right here. I've seen it all. I know everything there is to know about you. And I haven't left. Guys, go back to the beginning. I saw my granny, and I thought that I could keep it all in hiding. She looked at me, and she gave me that look that only a granny could give, and I was like, I'm toast. And I was like, I'm caught. And she looked at me, and I thought that she was going to be, in that moment, I wanted to hide because I thought that she wouldn't love me as much anymore. And that's why we hide. But instead, she said, are you okay? And she was like, you're grounded like forever, but are you good? And my granny, I didn't lose any of her love in my life. And it's just a small picture of God with us. He's going, listen, I see it all. Like, I know. There's no tricking me. And Jesus is saying, I know, and I'm still here. Would you come out of hiding? Coming out of hiding before God is how you become whole, guys. I love this quote, and I've said it a couple times, but it's on the screen tonight. The secret to life is to live a life without secrets. You can come out of hiding from wherever you've been. Coming out of hiding is how you become whole. This is how you become the person of integrity that God's called you to be. I love that word integrity. Though that word integrity is from the root word integer. Do you know what integer means? It means whole. That you are just whole before God. That there's not multiple of you, that there are no masks, that you are who you are wherever you are. And this is what God calls us into. And this is a life of freedom. So whatever that thing is, if you're like, I'm never going to tell blank, whatever fills that blank, God is going, I already know. I can't say this to anybody. God's going, I already see it. And I'm here. I'm still here. He's still here. And his hands are open out to us, saying, would you come out of hiding so you can be the person of wholeness that I've called you to be, so you can be this person of integrity. Whatever it is that is in hiding, Jesus, this is what he does. He meets us with healing over and over again. And maybe you're going like, yeah, but that was like 6, 7, 8 times ago. Maybe you feel like, man, that was like 1,000 times ago, right? Like God has got to be done. I would be done with me. God's going, but I'm still here. Would you come out of hiding? So that way you can experience healing And so Jesus can make you whole. Jesus meets every deception with the cross, guys. Every deception he meets with the cross that he died on. And his resurrection is the guarantee of your freedom and my freedom if we put our faith in Christ. Let's pray. God, I pray that we would stay away from living a life of deception and for places where we have battled with this, where we've fallen into this. Lord, that we would realize your hands are open for us to be redeemed and to begin walking in integrity, to begin walking in wholeness as you show us more and more who it is that you called us to be. And if you're here and you need to talk with somebody, we would love to talk with you tonight as we go, and we're going to have fun here in a couple minutes. But if you need to stay back and talk to someone, we're going to be down front. We'd love to talk with you. If God has made you whole, then you owe it to him to give him the worship that he deserves here in this next song, in these next few minutes. Let's stand and let's all respond to him how he's calling us to.